morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Kemp, and I'm the Director of Insight and Impact at the Froebel Trust. And I'm going to be chairing this third session, the focus of which is inspiring. Obviously, having listened to all of the presentations that have happened so far, they've offered so much inspiration already, but I'm really excited to be having this focus for the last session because I think that's a great way to finish the presentations. And our first speaker is Jo Albin-Clark, who's a lecturer and researcher in early childhood education at Edge Hill University. Throughout her work, embodied senses of resistance and subversion to dominant discourses have been a central thread. So I can't wait to hear what Jo is going to share with us this morning. Her presentation is called Connecting Everyday Principled Resistances in Early Childhood Education. So I'm going to pass over to Jo now. And please remember to put any questions you have in the Q&A.
Well, hello, everybody. Just waiting while my screen loads up, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm based at Edge Hill University, as Nicola very kindly introduced me to, and I work alongside Dr. Nathan Archer. So this is a joint piece of research. And just to mention, there's some lovely parallels between Edge Hill and Froebel. So Edge Hill as an institution started in 1885, just outside Liverpool. And our colours are based on the suffrage movement. So heliotrope, gold and green. I bet you didn't know heliotrope was a colour. It is, it's purple. So there's something about women's equality in the bones of Edge Hill because it was the first non-denominational college for women in teacher education in the Northwest. And then we've got Froebel's thinking with this advocacy for women and this championing of the intellect of women, and this lovely phrase, and agents of change, which is a wonderful thing. So some lovely connections there with Froebel's principles. So let me tell you more about the project. So our project, as you can see from the title, is really interested in the idea of stories. So enabling people to tell stories about practice and through those stories beginning to make sense of how they're enabling children's right to play, but also what they're resisting in order for that play to happen. So that's our main principle in doing so. So let me tell you a little bit more about what the context of the backdrop to our work is. So the reason why we're asking educators to tell stories about play and the resistance they have is because we recognise that play happens among a much broader context of quite sometimes formal approaches to learning. And what we've been concerned about, Nathan and I, in our previous work, because we've been working together for a few years now, and we've been thinking about how we've seen this shift in the tide in early childhood education where more formalized approaches and adult-led approaches seem to be creeping in. So we're thinking here with those directives that are about accountability, inspection regimes, assessment demands, and what those discourses do is may bring the highlight to literacy and numeracy more than those more holistic subjects, which we know are so important to young children's broader development and learning. So this is what's fueling our interest, what kind of policy context are we resisting and how do we stop this marginalisation of children's right to play? And of course, we're thinking here with Froebel's principles of the importance of autonomy and children being, again, this frame, agents, agents of their own learning. And in that way, of course, adults who they're with in the day are agents, and their knowledge, their knowledge and nurturing skills in enabling children in their self-directed activity. Their role becomes facilitation and guidance of play rather than instruction and direction with predetermined learning outcomes. So these are the kinds of questions that we're interested in, and the stories that we're interested in our participants telling us. And in the telling of those stories and the sharing of the stories, and participants listening to each other's stories, that's been a really important part of our project. So rather than our participants telling us stories one-to-one, with the stories have been shared across the participant group. And also we've been interested in encouraging our participants to tell their stories with more than words. So what we mean by that is the use of images and video and sound, and what places and spaces and materials were involved in those stories has been as interesting to us as the words that they've used. So let me tell you a little story now, just one little glimpse of a resistance story. So this is a story an educator told of a trip to the postbox, a very simple thing. And you can imagine that the posting of a letter, when you're working in a busy educational setting, you just do that on the way home, or on the way into work. But this educator thought, you know what, this might be a really lovely little provocation. So I'll take a group of children and we'll walk up to the postbox. But you can imagine there's some form filling to be done here. There's a risk assessment taking place. So this educator went through all the rigmarole of that. And on the way back from the post office, one child said, "Oh, can we go a different way? It's more sunny that way." So that interesting, isn't it, that sunlight had a role. There's something about responding to that sunnier side of the street. So the educator said, "Yeah, let's go back on the sunny side." So, of course, this opens up the door, doesn't it? They're walking on the sunnier side, and they found a tree stump. They stopped to look at the mushrooms that were growing on the tree stump. One child found a little leaf, turned it over, and revealed a little caterpillar. And here we can see a beautiful photograph that captures that moment. And lots of excitement and discussion here because they remembered the story of the hungry caterpillar, and we can feel the afternoon unfolding, can't we, as the educator came back, and some lovely animation and motivation and excitement as that child was picked up by the parent in this discovery of the caterpillar. And in the telling of this story, the participant, the educator, mentioned that this resistance in this story was just this simple act of saying yes. That's what I did. I said yes. Even though I planned to walk a certain route, I changed my route and I prolonged the time that I was going to be out because I saw that this was something that might be interesting. So sometimes resistance is as simple as saying yes to a child's question. And that felt quite a very enabling thing to do. So let me tell you more now about what we think this might mean and what kind of other findings we've had from the stories that we've gathered. Well, what we've been interested in thinking about across the story sharing is not just looking at the words that participants are using to tell us those stories, but paying attention to the modes. So what I mean by that is looking at the places, the spaces, the things, the materials of everyday life. What kind of things are going on in the everyday life of practice, and how is resistance against formalization and enabling children's autonomy working within that everydayness, within that everyday messy tangle of spaghetti. I remember Malaguzzi used a term like that, didn't he? The tangle of spaghetti. So, in the everyday complexities of practice, what are those how does that resistance manifest? How does it happen? What kind of senses and physicality and emotions are involved in it? And what we're thinking with this, and again, this is connecting to work we've done previously and work that we're thinking in our future scholarship, is this idea of resistance being an ebb and a flow. The idea of it's not just happening in small, isolated moments. What we're finding is the telling of stories of resistance realizes that these ebbs and flows can connect, make a bigger wave, if you like, of resistance. And what we found with our participants was a kind of emboldening. That's a nice word, isn't it? To be emboldened in that telling of the resistance story, to recognize their agency in that moment, and then to hear the agency of others. And then in your own practices, you're thinking, well, look at all those moments of agency that I have, and how my agency is connected with children's agency. And through that agency, we're interested in enabling our educators to celebrate thinking for themselves, making their own pedagogical decisions, using children's ideas as a basis for moving forward, rather than those predetermined learning outcomes leading. This idea that children and educators themselves are taking control more and feeling they're more able to interpret their pedagogical practice. But I just want to add a proviso in here that we're not shying away from the everyday realities. We don't want to be in our little dream world of thinking here. We want to root ourselves very firmly in the reality of the early years foundation stage in the English policy context. And we know those discourses of formalization and datification narratives. So datification meaning how the recording and assessment of children's achievement against developmental milestones, against those assessment points, particularly in nursery and reception classes, can feel like they dominate. There's a really beautiful paper that we thought with a lot, written by a Scandinavian researcher called Toynven, and she writes about being embodied by the data, how data seems to take over. So we want to be honest about the climate that we're in, and also the realities that our nursery and reception teachers and educators working in wider provision are working against. And we know the system, we want to be honest about the systems that we're working and not shy away from them. But what we find that is this storying of resistance, we think holds the potential for hope, for hopeful conditions for us and for the children that we work with. Because sometimes we can feel that, and particularly when I'm talking to my own students, because I'm a teacher educator at work, working with PGCE students and QTS students, it's the reality that they're working with. So how do we generate hope and a positive sense of self in those circumstances? So what we're thinking with is that the creation and telling of practice stories and recognizing how and where it happens can contribute to those wider resistance movements. And this idea of story sharing is something we find really interesting as a tool. And that creation of those counter narratives, other stories, that rather than this single story of early childhood education, they're realizing there's many stories of childhood education. Your story, your children's story, your own interpretation is something really important to us and some of the motivation in our work. And of course, what we're interested in by thinking with more than words, we're thinking about emotions and things and places and spaces by using theories from post-humanism here. What we've sorted to notice those emotional states too. So we've found those resistance movements folded in with caring moments, with moments of joy in practice. And we won't shy away from using the word love either, because in our stories, they're using loving language, which we find really interesting. So let me tell you about what's next for us in our work. We're really interested in sharing our findings in multiple ways. There's a website I can share with you. We've got a Resistance Stories website where we can share our wider scholarship there with you. And we're interested in using blogs, for example, and podcasts and short articles that are easy to access, sort of bite-sized chunks, if you like, because stories can be small. And there's something wonderful about thinking with something that's small. It feels more accessible, we think. And we're also working with our wider scholarship, so publishing in peer-reviewed journals and book chapters. We're keeping up that kind of scholarly work as well. Nathan and I are connecting in with, very inspired by Alison Clark's work on slow pedagogies, of course, funded by the Froebel Trust. And we're both contributing to her next publication, which is more about slow knowledge. And storytelling has been really important to us. And we want to recognise that stories will inform our future scholarship. And of course, we need to finally say that we stand on the shoulders of giants. So we know that we're working with and inspired by scholars such as Peter Moss and his call for us to find counter narratives and to think with resistance, and Guy Robert Holmes's beautiful work, thinking about the neoliberal context. We know that we're joining a body of scholars and some more recent upcoming scholars that we want to celebrate. So, for example, Lynette Morris writes about acts of love. And Alicia Blayo-Banco writes about care and relational pedagogies as parts of resistance practices. So we're joining in with those wider dialogues. And you can see here we've got a range of publications that are relevant to it. And again, I'll share the connection to our resistance stories. So I just want to say thank you to you all for listening to me get overexcited with my sharing of my research. And I'd be welcome to talk about it more. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was truly inspiring. And I hope that those of you listening have found it to be so. Please do remember to put your questions in the Q&A so that we can have an opportunity to talk with Jo a bit more after our next presentation, which I'll move swiftly onto now. So want to introduce Alex Powell and Becky Goulding. So Alex is a dedicated senior advisory teacher for Cardiff Flying Start, which is a Welsh Government programme focused on supporting children and families in the most deprived areas of Wales. Becky is also an experienced Flying Start advisory teacher for Flying Start, and she leads a dedicated working group within the Flying Start advisory team focused on embedding and promoting Froebelian principles across Cardiff's Flying Start childcare settings. And Becky and Alex are going to be talking about block play indoors and outdoors, and the focus of this is inspiring educators in block play.
Florida, everybody. We'd just like to start, as many of you have already this morning, by thanking the Froebel Trust for this opportunity. Just before we started this project, we'd invested heavily across 36 childcare settings in indoor block play and purchased those resources for them. So having the opportunity to then extend that to the outdoors and come up with some key findings to recommend to our practitioners was a really wonderful experience. And then what we found since completing the project and sharing these key recommendations is that they're already having an impact in the settings that we work with. So we shared this very recently actually, with the leaders of our childcare settings, and they've taken these messages back, and we've seen some wonderful examples of the children accessing blocks in the outdoor environment. So just to give you some background and context about who we are, we both work for Cardiff Flying Start, which is a Welsh Government programme that offers funded childcare for 2 to 3-year-olds in some of the most deprived areas of Wales. The service aims to provide children and their families with opportunities and experiences that they might not otherwise have access to. And then we chose our project setting because it has a well-established outdoor area already, and that is both valued and well used by the practitioners there. The practitioners understand the benefits of outdoor learning and embrace the opportunity to explore block play in this environment, enhancing children's learning and development with high-quality, open-ended resources. So the project aimed to investigate how outdoor block play supports children's development, particularly in comparison to indoor block play. It focused on understanding whether outdoor environments offer a greater freedom, movement, and opportunities for exploration. And by introducing the large interlocking blocks into the setting, the project examined how children collaborated, overcame physical challenges, and engaged in problem solving. A key objective was to promote Froebelian principles by guiding practitioners to support child-led play through sensitive, well-timed adult involvement. So our research methodology used qualitative methods that included observations, learning stories, and time sampling techniques. This hoped to capture the richness of 2 to 3-year-old children's experiences in outdoor block play. When we started the project, 6 practitioners received and continue to receive training grounded in Froebelian principles, with a focus on the role of the enabling adults and supporting 2 to 3-year-olds' independent exploration and creativity. The child's voice was central to everything that we did, and we supported this through active listening, attentive responses to non-verbal communication, and opportunities for reflection. Ethical considerations were carefully addressed, including informed consent, safeguarding protocols, and a commitment to inclusive practice. So all of this began for us back in April 2024 and was actually inspired by a conversation that Becky had with Dr. Stella Louis about the stages of block play indoors when she was attending the Froebel Trust short course. And Stella then encouraged us to look into this project and see if we could find those links between indoor and outdoor block play. So this began with approaching a childcare setting and getting them on board. We quickly realised that we would need more than Becky and I to conduct the observation. So we used our colleagues within our team, and we knew that we needed to find something that would give us an opportunity to reflect. So we created some documents that allowed us to feed in our observations, but ask key questions as we were going ahead that we might not be able to have face-to-face conversations for, but we had this Bible of information that was a diary that allowed us to reflect throughout. Once we'd established that, we ordered the blocks and set them in the setting, and our initial observations and professional dialogue highlighted differences in children's freedom, engagement, and sustained block play in indoor and outdoors. And this was the point where we first introduced the training to the practitioners. Our initial observations showed that we definitely needed to make small manageable changes to the block play provision, and we added methods of transportation into the area. The planning adjustments and the adult involvement and the use of space were all adjusted during this time, but we made sure that those changes were realistic and sustainable for the setting. We then found out that practitioners needed to reflect on what had changed and why, and we took into consideration factors that supported or limited children's freedom in play and continued to make those links to Froebelian principles and curriculum expectations. About July last year, we began coming to a conclusion of what we'd seen, and those key findings and those Froebelian themes were really strong at this point, but we did feel that we needed just a little bit more time to observe, so we did extend that. And I think that was really rich in having the confidence to say, no, we do need to observe a little bit more. And that then solidified our findings and allowed us to put this together, which is available on the Froebel Trust website if you'd like to continue to read. I'm going to pass over to Becky now, who's going to talk more about the differences that we saw between indoor and outdoor block play and how we introduced this to the children to support their agency.
Thanks, Alex. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Alex. So introducing the blocks and set in the area. The outdoor blocks were a brand new resource to the setting. From the outset, we decided that we wanted the children to be actively involved in the process, unpacking, exploring and setting up the blocks themselves. This approach was intentional, aiming to give the children a sense of ownership and agency. Practitioners were originally asked not to engage with the blocks so we could observe how the children engaged independently. This was adapted as the project progressed. The blocks were initially arranged by size and shape in a large covered area in the outdoor environment, and this setup offered a structured starting point for the children's exploration. Ongoing observations showed the need to extend this space, and we observed that children's play was mainly horizontal building, which highlighted the limited available space in the original layout. As the team continued to observe the practitioners in the settings and us as researchers, we noticed and became more curious about how the play might change if the blocks were made mobile and were used across the wider outdoor area. As Alex mentioned in our cycle, that resources for transportation were added later on in the project. With this shift, we aim to encourage more dynamic and expansive play, exploration for spatial concepts, collaboration between the children, and increased creativity in how children use the blocks. Next slide, please. So this is talking about the indoor block play. So indoors, practitioners observed that block play was most effective when supported by a well-organised and intentional environment. Clear boundaries for play helped children understand the purpose and structure of the area, while access to a wide range of maintained blocks and resources encourage exploration and creativity. Carefully considered conditions, such as sufficient space and minimal distractions, supported sustained focus and collaboration, enabling children to build with increasing precision, confidence, and complexity over time. The next slide, please. So practitioners also note challenges in the block door area, and just some of these were limited physical space, restricted the children's creativity. Expectations around noise limited the children's play sometimes, and that the need to keep the areas tidy could prevent the ambitious or large-scale building projects. And then outdoors, the next slide, please, Alex, sorry. outdoors practitioners observe a shift in children's engagement. As I said, we then decided to add in resources for transportation to take it from the one area to the bigger garden area. And the increased space supported whole body movement and physical exploration. The children had greater opportunities for collaboration and imaginative play. The children drew on the wider natural environment in their play, and this aligns with Froebel's emphasis on nature as a powerful educational force and children's right to explore physically and socially. The next slide, please. Outside, in the outdoor block play, practitioners also noticed that children were taking more risks, negotiating roles with their peers, incorporating loose natural parts into their constructions. Challenges of outdoor block play also included the need for more durable resources, which did come with a cost implication, which we highlighted wouldn't obviously be available to all of our settings, that there was weather-related limitations, there was less consistent organisation of materials compared to the indoor blocks, and these factors affected continuity of learning and child independence when revisiting ideas. And this was supported by Nicola in 2010. Next slide, please. So across both environments, our research was sort of building up evidence, and that practitioners valued block play for supporting mathematical thinking, developing problem-solving abilities, enhancing communication and language skills, empowering children through meaningful hands-on experiences, as supported by Hansel and Brooker and Whitehead. And then the differences, indoor and outdoor block play, what did our research actually show us? So our research showed clear differences in children's block play across the environments. Indoors, organised spaces with clear boundaries and full sets of blocks help children focus and create complex structures, reflecting Froebel's principles of order and beauty. However, limited space, noise, rules, tidiness expectations can restrict creativity and large builds. Outdoors, our research showed us that greater space encouraged movement, collaboration and imaginative play using natural materials, supporting Froebel's emphasis on nature and exploration. Children take more risks and negotiate roles, but challenges did include resource durability, weather, and less consistent organisation, which could affect the continuity of play. Across both indoors and outdoors, practitioners valued the block play. The next slide. I'm going to pass you back over to Alex now to just share some observations.
Thank you, Becky. Like I said previously, please do visit the Froebel Trust and have a look at this project, because we're not going to read through every observation today, but it'll give you an opportunity to read and bring this project to life in your own time. So the following slides are going to look at those key themes that we observed during our research. And the first one relates to adult presence and sensitive pedagogy. So that our observations frequently highlighted the need for adults to encourage, be present and collaborate with the children whilst they engage in their block play. This, of course, links and supports Froebel's ideas relating to knowledgeable and nurturing educators. We also saw a strong connection with the environment, and children showed us that the design and placement of the block areas strongly influenced their engagement. The blocks needed to be visible, accessible and inviting, and that encouraged deeper and longer lasting play. Outdoor block areas that were hidden or isolated were used far less frequently, and we found this out very early in our project because of our initial ideas to place that block play under the covered shelter. Children often repurpose the blocks for gross motor play, such as climbing, balancing and jumping, and you can see here that they are collaborating really wonderfully in that photo. Children also use the blocks to adapt into furniture and props for imaginative and small world play. And these behaviours reflect Froebel's principle that children build strong connections to place and nature through open-ended, meaningful materials. A regular review of the block play organisation is important to ensure it remains welcoming, well presented, and offers open invitations to explore. Settings should consider whether making the blocks transportable could further support flexible, creative, child-led play. This is something that we saw frequently during our research, which was the idea of symbolic play and storytelling with the block play. Like the above observation shows, we observed many moments like this one, where blocks became home for spiders, rivers for fish, tunnels for trains, or characters in family stories. The rich imaginative scenarios illustrate Frederick Froebel's belief that play is the highest expression of human development in childhood, for it alone is the free expression of what is in a child's soul. Symbolic play and storytelling were most sustained when adults were present to listen attentively, model language, and offer gentle prompts that extended children's ideas and deepened their engagement. And then the final one was risk-taking and autonomy. So we saw that children used the outdoor blocks to test their physical limits through balancing, climbing, and jumping. The risk-taking supports physical confidence, coordination, and self-challenge. And Froebel's freedom with guidance was evidence. Children thrived when boundaries and adult support were clear. Guidance needed to come before freedom to ensure safe and confident exploration. And early modelling, encouragement, and safety cues enable children to take calculated risks independently. And just before I hand back over to Becky, I am going to point out this photograph because it really highlighted to us how children are using the resources around them to bring their experiences to life. So this photograph, you can see it shows that one child had built a wall with the blocks, and he's used the sweeping brush to prop it up. And just before this observation, we'd had a really heavy storm in Wales, and his garden fence had blown down in his garden, and he'd seen his dad prop the fence back up. And then he came into setting and modelled that and imitated it in his play, which really shows the importance of the resources to allow the children to make sense of the world around them. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand you back to Becky.
Thank you.
So I'll just quickly fly through this next bit, saying about how the ethics and the child voice was sort of central to everything that we did. We allowed the children to communicate thoughts, feelings, and verbal cues during their play. I'll just quickly do our key findings because I think it just brings everything together. So our key findings of the project were children's block play reached its fullest potential when practitioners were actively present, modelling, encouraging, and knowing when to step back or step in. When practitioners joined in as thoughtful companions rather than directors, children extended their ideas, building taller, experimenting with interlocking features and adding rich symbolic elements. Also, our observations showed that children sought reassurance and inspiration. Recommendations for practice would be that settings need to consider whether these interlocking blocks and the big blocks were suitable for our 2-year-olds, and practitioners need to feel confident to be companions in block play. The rest of this information can be found on the final project piece, but we would like to just give final thoughts and conclusions to say thank you to the staff and the children at First Steps Nursery and the families for accepting and supporting the project, because it wouldn't have been possible without them. And the 2 members of staff that supported us that are not here today, Catherine and Rachel. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex and Becky. That was fantastic. And like all the projects, I'm sure that we're going to want to find out more by having a look at your final reports. We've just got a few minutes for some questions. So I'm going to kick off with one that's come up in the Q&A, which is for Joe. So Joe, I don't know if you want to pop your camera back on now. So the question is, in small early year settings like mine in Wales, where we are balancing Froebelian principles with external accountability frameworks, how can we meaningfully recognise resistant stories without them being lost to assessment-driven practice?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And I can feel it. I can feel what you're describing. And it's that sort of sense of not wanting to let it be washed over by it all and driven by it. I think my advice would be to talk to each other, and to start recognizing how play is happening and talk to each other about it. Oh, I noticed it here today. Let me tell you about what happened there. So I think it starts with that recognition of where play is happening, articulation, so talking it through, and then sharing it with children themselves and with families and with each other. So start in small ways, I'd suggest.
Lovely. Thanks, Jo. I've got a question, I suppose, for probably all of you, really, but was there anything particularly that surprised you in your projects? That's something that was an unexpected finding? Perhaps Becky and Alex, if you've got anything that from your sort of looking at what was happening outdoors versus what was happening indoors with block play, whether there was anything that particularly surprised you?
I think one of the biggest things that surprised us was when we first set the blocks up outside, how the children wouldn't access them. They were unfamiliar, they hadn't seen them before, they hadn't experienced them, they hadn't, I don't think they would be something that they would have at home. And children didn't engage with them at all until the practitioners gave them permission and modelled. And then as soon as practitioners were playing with those blocks and inviting children into the play, the change was huge. And I think that really surprised us, because I think we expected the children to be excited by something new in the setting. But they weren't. They were really, really sort of dubious, I suppose, and just not sure what they were for. So I think that for me, that was a sort of a real sort of insight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything there, Alex?
I was just thinking exactly the same thing. And if Becky hadn't started talking before me, I would have answered in exactly the same way.
Oh, great. Thank you. What about you, Jo? Was there anything in your project?
Yeah, I think it was in resistance being small and big. So the saying yes in the story that I told was quite a simple thing, an everyday thing, a doable thing. And there were other more structural things, resistances that we saw. So, for example, one story told the story of a small provision who decided to have a week off, and they described it as a retreat. So for a whole week, they backed off from the timetable and they called it the Joy Retreat, which is wonderful. And that was about saying yes to children's child-directed play and suppressing adult-directed outcomes for a period of time. And that was a whole series of stories over time. So retreating. So yes, the saying of yes, the pulling back from things. There's lots of movements that we're interested in thinking with about how resistance happens with. It can be big, it can be small, I think, is what's interesting to us.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your amazing presentations. And I think so much inspiration to take away. I can see in the chat that Lynn's she circled the idea that resistance can be as simple as saying yes. And I think that in some ways, all of the projects reflect that things can be very simple, but also there's challenge and there's questioning in there, which can take us into brave new spaces that perhaps we never imagined.